Hello, welcome to Future Left Podcast. I'm Adam Simpson. Casey is once again not here, the bastard. Yeah, and I am here, however, with Future Left co-founder and just all-around nice gentleman named Michael Bufano. Mike, how are you today?
Doing great, man. Back in New York for the first time in 10 months.
I know. Not in the land of the Egyptians. You're in the land of the Americans. You know?
That's right.
That's pretty interesting. It's pretty interesting stuff. Anyway, this is Future Left, where we talk about future stuff and lefty stuff and everything in between. And you should visit us at futureleft.org. Find all our original content. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter, iTunes, SoundClouds, all that crap. That way you stay up to date on all the future-y lefty things. But anyway, today we're talking about the police and not that goddamn band. No, we're not talking about Sting and the Police. Yeah, we're talking about a different kind of police, notably the authorities of the state. So I wanted to talk about police for a little while now because of this mess in Oakland right now. I don't know how closely you've been following this, Mike, but Jesus, it's getting weird. There's a police officer that killed himself a year ago. His wife killed herself, and her family thinks that he did it. And then there's sex trafficking,
a love triangle, and
then there's an underage sex worker in the center of it all who has apparently had several relationships, quotes, with police, yeah, it's getting weird.
And you know what's crazy about all this? This comes, after a couple of years of a federal investigation.
Yeah.
Restrictions placed on the
Oakland PD.
The Oakland PD by the Department of Justice. So that makes it even crazier how all this could have happened under their nose.
Exactly. Came out of kind of the quote unquote Rough Riders scandal of police brutality in the early aughts there.
That was the Rough Riders. That was with those policemen who were planting drugs on individuals and contraband and
real training day shit right there.
Yeah.
But they had what was it? They had 3 police chiefs step down in 8 days. All this got me thinking about police accountability. That's what I wanted to talk about today. And there seems to be an aversion to transparency, which I think only makes this worse. Because, we both read a piece in Slate this week, a very good little explainer article. I think it's entitled, what the hell's happening in the Oakland Police Department? I think it might be called WTF. Because it's appropriate here. But anyway, we're getting drips and of leaks coming out of the Oakland PD. But it got me thinking about the broader perspective on police accountability, in particular related to a new report from Campaign Zero, an organization that spawned out of the Black Lives Matter movement, and this turbulent past few years we've had between Ferguson, Missouri, and Baltimore, Maryland, with the death of Freddie Gray there, and I really think it's an interesting project, and they have a list of various rubrics that they're interested in pursuing. But I wanted to have a discussion with you about police accountability, in particular because both of us have family members in police departments. My uncle is a police officer in the South, Mike, and your family.
Oh, my brother Rick is a police officer in New York City, and I think the first thing he would tell you is with other police officers, it really varies from state to state, city to city, about the various institutions in place to monitor police forces and how the police interact with the prosecutor's office. There's all sorts of different dynamics that are at play. And you could have a city like Oakland, which has a terrible record, versus, say, comparison with New York City, which has a lot more institutions in place that actually monitor over police officers. So it really depends on what place you go to.
When I was home recently, I had a conversation with my uncle, and he was like, "Oh, how's work?" And I'm an idiot. I work in a think tank, or I did at the time. And I was like, "Oh, that's fine. How's your work?" And for no damn reason, he's a police officer. It's very different. And his response was like, "Oh, fucking Obama's making it difficult." And I was like, "What? What the hell's Obama got to do?"
I don't know what he has to do with local police force.
With a suburban police force, yeah.
And if you mean like a record. Under Obama, we've seen, the military-industrial complex have an amazing effect on police departments. They've been getting a lot of the hand-me-downs from a lot of companies. So
yeah, look, someone's got to pay for all of this Lockheed Martin money that we're throwing around. So
exactly,
this is a really important issue to me. I think that I work on a lot of conflict zones. I've done a lot of work on civil wars, and the security forces in a given state are really the front line for state community relations, and and it can really lead to major breakdowns.
And I think this is one area where we're going to be in complete agreement. There's a whole debate about how effective our police departments are throughout America. Is there problems with racism? Is there problems with abuse of power? But the one thing that I think we're going to come to a complete agreement on is that they have lost the trust of a large percentage of Americans, that their legitimacy as an institution to keep the peace, it's become incredibly weak because of their lack of ability to establish trust with local populations.
Absolutely. It's a big part of the Campaign Zero project is community relationships and community accountability, really. Mm-hmm. But their latest report is about police union contracts, and you can find their full report at checkthepolice.org. But really, they point to 6 elements of police union contracts. And I'll just list them off really quickly. 1, disqualifying misconduct complaints from a police officer's or certain forms of misconduct complaints, depending on what in particular is being complained about. Number 2, preventing police from being interrogated in a timely manner. Often they wait to question a police about a given alleged misconduct, which quote unquote gives them time to get their story straight, perhaps. Number 3, officers given access to information that normally citizens wouldn't have, when basically they get to know what evidence that is against them, and they get to kind of confer with either their union rep or maybe their attorney or whatever. And then number 4, limiting disciplinary consequences, and often this has to do with we'll talk about this in a second. In Seattle, for instance, there's a 3-person panel that reviews misconduct allegations, and one of a review board, I believe it's called, and 2 of them are police officers, and one of them is an arbitrator. Stuff like that can get in the way of disciplinary measures. Number 5, requiring cities to pay costs related to police misconduct, which seems to me like a conflict of interest when it comes to prosecuting these cases. And then 6, preventing information on past misconduct from being recorded and retained. And it was interesting. They did a big review of 81 major cities in the United States. 72 have these types of barriers there. And I don't know. It was very interesting. They were actually, and they to their credit, they pointed to a lot of major cities that don't have any of these obstacles, like Boston, Dallas, Denver, and others. Normally I'm a big union guy, So, but it made me think, like, my grandfather was in a union, and I grew up with this notion about unions, and there's power in a union.
Out of all the unions that I've encountered, none are more stubborn than the police union in terms of being subject to criticism. And I'll even say this about my brother and the police officers I met in New York City. They get very defensive about any type of criticism in terms of policing within the United States. They're a very tight-knit group. Yeah. They won't talk out of line. And that gets me a little suspicious, because you should never have this type of institution where you're too paranoid to ever speak out. And this is what I've also especially my own brother has told this to me in the past. He himself wouldn't really ever write something or speak out or write a book about his job until after he retired, just in case anything came out that could get him in trouble with his current job.
It's interesting, the case in Oakland. The sex worker at the center of this big scandal, the only police officer who's admitted to sleeping, aside from the deceased officer that committed suicide, is a retired police officer who admits that he had sex with this young girl. So it's interesting, but I noticed the same thing, that by and large there's a culture of you don't talk bad, quote unquote, about the family. I
think it's because it's a different type of bureaucracy from the other type of government bureaucracy for jobs. It's like a military, essentially.
It's exactly. And it's a very and it's very different from other kinds of unions. like I'm all for a union bargaining for better work protections, safe working conditions, and those are all relevant to police, I think, and their union contracts. But in this case, like this is directly related to, as I was getting at earlier, kind of the primary feature, rather, the monopolization on the legitimate use of force. Like, and I think we're seeing for large communities around the United States that the police are losing that legitimacy in the eyes of the people that they're supposed to serve and protect. And I think I've said this before on the podcast, but I think the difference between the police here and the police in Egypt, we both had interactions with police in Egypt, Mike, but I always got a sense that, and granted, I grew up as a white male. There's no doubt about it. And I'm still that. I don't know why I said I grew up that way, but my experience with police has been from that perspective. And I've always had the approach that, like, police here, they do have this ethos, and we can debate about how much they succeed at it, but they do have this ethos about serving the communities that they stand for. In Egypt, the police, it's a very different ethos. They're about protecting the state. They don't protect people.
I have a great story about this. I was in Alexandria about a month ago, and there were protests taking place that day against the regime. And in all the major squares, all the police officers were there making sure that big gatherings didn't take place. And while I was walking through this one square, in the middle of the square, there were crowds walking by. This older gentleman was apparently beating his daughter. And when I say hitting his daughter, I don't mean little taps I mean, he was beating her in public. Some of the other citizens were trying to get involved to get him to stop. The police were surrounding the square, worried about protesters. They did nothing. They didn't arrest the dude. They didn't stop him. They didn't get in the way. And I've seen this before countless times with, men harassing women on the streets and police sitting there doing nothing. Because, as you said, there is that kind of ethos amongst the police force. A, they're not well trained. B, they're not well paid. And C, their main job is to defend the state. Yeah. And so I'll say that as a credit to police forces in America. There is that big difference there.
Absolutely. But the thing about it to me is this concept of secrecy. I mean, it really makes me kind of question that to a degree. And I do agree that police here don't. It's very different from the context in Egypt. But when you have this rally around, circle the wagons mentality every time something happens, whether it's Eric Garner in New York or Freddie Gray, the Rough Ride in Baltimore, it really does make me skeptical that not skeptical of police, but it makes me skeptical that there is an accountability structure that can really prevent people from this becoming kind of I don't know, almost like an insurgent part of the state.
Oh, sure. There are parts of the part of the police force is to protect the police force itself and the state, just the people. And I get that. And there's several things that do worry me. Number one, there is no database that collects all records of police shootings.
Oh my God, that killed me. We were reading part of our reading list in the Atlantic this week. The FBI director James Comey he told reporters, "It's ridiculous that I can't tell you how many people were shot by police last week, last month, last year."
And this is something that should be readily available for all citizens to analyze. And I'm not saying that all these shootings are because you had reckless police officers going out there killing people. There are occasionally legitimate times where a police officer has to pull out his gun.
Sure.
But when it does happen, it should be recorded. It should be available for public record. And social scientists should have the ability to analyze it to understand, okay, do we have a problem? If so, where and how can we fix it? We don't even know what the problem is.
It reminds me of the gun control problem because we have, this situation where we're legally not allowed to study guns, so we don't have the CDC and other people that do the research and really think about the data and do experiments on what works and what doesn't work. We're just in the dark about it.
You know what I would love to see, Adam? I would love to have a database where I could compare where do police shootings happen with where are guns more readily available. Is there a correlation between more police shootings and, like, are police departments in certain regions more paranoid, about the public? Are they less trustful of the public, and is that why they're pulling out their guns?
Unfortunately, I get a sense that we're in the dark on both of those rubrics. So I don't know how we'd look for a point of convergence there.
Yeah, you're right. So that's a problem.
But yeah, so the question I wanted to pose first and foremost, and I want to return to the union question in just a second, but what do you think? There's all kinds of proposals about how we get a more accountable police force, and obviously, there are tons of police forces around the United States. It's not really a federal issue; it's a local issue, it's a state issue, etc. But people talk about prosecutors being more independent. They talk about community oversight, community engagement, body cameras, but we've seen situations where that kind of fails. Like prosecutors have to have a relationship with the police. They're constantly working with them. Even community engagement doesn't always lead to good outcomes. The A and Q in Atlantic Council at the Atlantic magazine. It'll be in the notes this week. Really great article that kind of problematized all of these solutions, which makes me think. First of all, there's no one single cure-all, but are any of these in particular? Do you think that they would work better? Would work less? Which ones of these quote unquote solutions to police accountability do you think are kind of key?
For me, one of the best things is simply strengthening internal affairs and institutions whose job is to overlook what police departments are doing and make sure there's no conflict of interest where former cops are sitting on this institution or vice versa. I don't like the idea of NGO, and I know I've seen a lot of NGOs in different cities kind of try to interact with police officers. I feel like a lot of these NGOs, which are kind of semi-professional, they consist of a lot of young, idealistic kids who are kind of easy pushovers, and they're not well experienced to do their job. I know this is the case in New York City, where I've often talked with my brother Rick about the NGOs whose job is to kind of overlook what they do, and it's kind of there's not a lot of experience within these NGOs. I would rather have a more professionalized governmental institution that whose job is to overlook what these what the police are actually doing.
I mean, I think the role of civil society is very important. Civil society is what we normally call it in Egypt when we're talking about kind of a fractured state. We'd be like, civil society, empowering civil society is important. Yeah. But I think it's true, and people don't like to think of like we have to engage civil society because it's maybe because of the development aspect. Like we don't like to think of ourselves as the object of development.
I think where civil society comes into play here, what local police departments need to do is, you have more local sports outings, local barbecues, local meet and greets with different members of the population. I think having more face-to-face interaction in some communities will help. And
no, I think it's about kind of town hall. I'm less impressed by a barbecue than I am by, higher up in the police department having to get grilled by this community about what they're worried about versus because it might not be the case everywhere, but as much anymore. But there was a time when like the drug war was being prosecuted, and people on in the communities were not. The drug issue wasn't an issue for them as much as it was for kind of the national line for police. In some areas, it's actually people are very worried about opiates these days, and that epidemic, particularly in the Midwest, I believe, is where that's getting really bad in the Northeast. But sitting with the community and engaging their questions and really hearing firsthand about their concerns, I think is key.
Don't underestimate the importance, though, of informal
of some pulled pork,
exactly,
some pizza parties.
Yeah, exactly, and over sports dinner. Like one of the things that the NYPD has tried to do over the last couple of years is increase the amount of soccer games and baseball games they do with local communities. My brother Rick right now, he's working with kids coming from underprivileged backgrounds, doing these summer programs where, the kids play sports so that's like one of the things they've been trying recently in the last couple of years. So that's an option.
I think that's great. I think the forum is an important aspect specifically. And I think, Campaign Zero has, I think, 10 things, police union contracts being one of them. But the three main pillars, I guess they would probably say, it says here, limiting police interventions, improving community relations, and ensuring accountability. So the police union contract thing today is really about accountability, and I think the body cams are important too. But being on camera hasn't really meant much for accountability, like we saw with the death of Eric Garner in New York. And I'm not convinced that without, as you said, Mike, institutions, that just seeing it doesn't mean as much. It might rile the public up to do something, but that's not the institutional change that we're probably looking for.
Well, you're right. The issue of prosecutors is big here. One of the articles that we read, it's when you think about a prosecutor, in order for him to get convictions, he needs cooperation with police officers. He needs to be able to work with them on a daily basis.
Yeah.
Now, because of that interconnection, if there ever comes a time where that police officer is put on trial, that prosecutor pushes too hard for a conviction. During cases like Eric Gardner, where the line between legality and illegality is not so sure, all of a sudden, it's the prosecutor might not be aggressive in terms of prosecution.
I really do feel like the prosecutors just have a kind of like a professional incentive to give them kind of an easy go of it.
And it's the same thing within police departments. Police officers don't have the incentive to, I don't want to use the word rat here, but I guess, it is the word you have to use to rat out on their...
No, certainly in pop culture, anytime that I like the internal affairs division, IAD, there's all I get the feeling on police writers on police, or the writers on police shows think that everyone throws around acronyms all day. So, but like IAD, they're all a bunch of rats, and I'm just like, I don't know. Like, I imagine that it is adversarial, but I don't know. But that's the sense I get is that it's adversarial.
From talking with cops, there is definitely a lot of bad mouthing of internal affairs, and my brother, joked around. It's like you can't take a piss, without having to, write down something on a piece of paper, or that it's very heavily bureaucratized, their jobs. And that's a credit to police officers in New York City. New York City is ultra obsessive in terms of the paperwork they have to fill out and how they're monitored on a daily basis. Right. So it can be, there's a lot of pressure on them in certain cases to perform up to task, and especially with quotas and whatnot. And, every month they have to, arrest a certain amount of individuals. That puts a lot of pressure on them. So to be fair to police officers, there is a lot that's expected of them.
Sure.
It's.
I think that's a positive thing, and I think you're right. It's a credit to people that do it well. But we're lucky enough. We're talking about police union contracts, and we're lucky enough right now. Seattle, which actually I mentioned the 6 components of police union contracts that Campaign Zero identified as particularly. That poses obstacles to accountability. Seattle had all 6. It was one of only a few cities that really had all 6 barriers that Campaign Zero was worried about. And right now, Seattle is renegotiating its police union contract. And a co-chair of the Community Police Commission called it the Super Bowl of police accountability. That is the police union contract. But again, it doesn't seem to be going all that well. They actually got Campaign Zero to comment on the negotiations, and the member of Campaign Zero called it mediocre at best. One advance was this discipline review board that I mentioned earlier. Instead of having a 3-person panel, 2 of whom were police officers, it's one arbitrator. However, the arbitrator has to have some experience in the force, which means that it's either a retired police officer or a current police officer anyway. So it's still a little bit complicated there. In terms of civilian oversight, my understanding is that it was largely getting kind of discarded in the negotiations. Mm-hmm. But it goes to show you. I mean, if these are the Super Bowl of police accountability, it goes to show you how much these matter. And really, I hadn't heard much about police union contracts really until now.
Well, one of the strongest aspects of police union contracts is they, in New York City, they protect them very heavily in cases of lawsuits.
Yeah.
These are very common within the, so for example, a police officer, in New York City will regularly get sued every year for something that they do. Sometimes these lawsuits are legitimate. A lot of times they're not. And I think to be fair to police unions, not everything they get sued over is necessarily legit. and they do need some forms of protection.
Like I said, I'm all for protection. Actually, this is a quote that I thought was interesting, and I think we need to conclude pretty soon. But so I'm going to transition the conversation a little bit, because my final question is returns to the notion of a union. It says here, these in the Campaign Zero report. This is my preferred quote by me anyway. These agreements are meant to ensure that workers are treated fairly with dignity and respect. They are not meant to deny other citizens fairness, dignity, and respect. And it got me thinking: being a part of a police union is very different from being a part of, say, a electrical workers union or a machinist union, something like that, because of the public good, the public safety and security aspect. Should we, Mike, do you think we should think of police union contracts as very, very different?
Yes, I think we have to.
Yeah, me too.
We almost have to deal with it like it's a military situation. I mean, unlike other bureaucracies, police officers can't question the orders given to them below like you can in other bureaucracies. There's less room for discretion. Also, from the other end of the spectrum, there's a lot of other issues. When a policeman screws up, it's much more severe than when a regular bureaucrat screws up as well. So there's also a lot more pressure for accountability at the same time. Yeah. So it's a very delicate situation dealing with police officers. Plus, we have to keep in mind these are people that have to walk around with a gun every day. They have to deal with some of the worst aspects of our society on a daily basis.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that police, unlike machinists and electricians or whatever, police when they go on strike, it's a pretty big deal. So that's another aspect of it. But I'm inclined to agree that police unions should be treated very, very differently than other unions, but because of the social good aspect. But I got me thinking, the union that I hear gets shit on the most is the teachers union. Do we start talking about public sector employees getting different treatment because it's not the same negotiation between quote unquote capital and labor. In this case, it's much more management and labor, as it has been in the past with other industries, of course. But I don't know. It kind of bothered me because I really want an effective teachers union just as much as I want an effective police union. I think it's a question that'll go unanswered. But how do we kind of correct police unions without screwing over other teachers unions, other public sector employees who issues like this would have pretty huge reverberations for?
The answer is we have to try to find a balance between the needs of the public and the needs of the individual workers within each of these institutions. Yeah. I don't know if there's a way to do that, though, because you have to treat the police different from the teachers.
Exactly. And honestly, like in my mind, it's not about finding a balance between police and the policed. In my mind, it's the people that come first. I mean, it has to be out of balance. You know what I mean?
Well, but here's the thing. But the police are people as well. I mean, they're individuals with families that own homes that have.
Right. But as people that are responsible for walking around our neighborhoods with guns and enforcing the law, it's they're representing the state, and the state is, in my mind, it should be secondary to the populace.
Well, I think no matter what happens, we need more positive dialogue on both sides.
Sure.
Police officers have to be less defensive.
I think that's certainly true.
And sometimes they could get very arrogant and very nasty about what they do in this kind of self-entitled, you're not a police officer, you don't know what you're talking about. That's never, by the way, it's never an excusable argument in any political debate, because most of us have never experienced most professions. But these things affect us all.
I have no idea what it's like to be a textile worker. I'll fully admit that. Yeah.
Exactly. And on the other end of the spectrum, the public has to be, they also have to understand what police officers go through on a daily basis. And that they also have to understand almost never pick up, like my brother's never had to pull out his gun to shoot somebody, and most police officers have never done that. Most police officers have never framed a minority by planting drugs on them. This is still, this is still something that is done by a small minority.
I hope no one got the impression that we were trying to say that every police officer in Oakland and indeed America has been with a sex worker. That's not what I'm implying.
Exactly. That's not the case at all.
It's not the case at all. I am concerned about police accountability and how we approach it. I want to keep having conversations like this. It's rare that we talk about something that's so important, I think, for internal communities. It's a shame that Casey's not here to talk about with us, because he's the one that covers a lot of issues like this. Yeah, we'll keep having conversations like these. And with that, I think we'll let you go today. Visit futureleft.org. Like and share this with your friends and all that stuff. We'll talk to you next time. Bye.